In this video, we're going to take a look at the Android activity lifecycle and consider how we can use it for location updates. So first of all, when I say activity, I essentially mean a screen, something that the user can look at. And this is the life cycle of events that happens to an activity. So at the very top, we have an activity that the user can interact with. It's ready, it's prepared, it's displaying, it has events that we can correspond with. At the very beginning, we have a situation where the activity has not yet been created. So these kind of oval-looking things represent different states of an activity. First of all, it's nothing. Then it goes to a created state, which means it's not quite yet ready for the user, but we have done some initializations. Now those initializations occur in a method called onCreate. And that might sound a little bit similar because here is this method onCreate. And you notice that we are overwriting the method onCreate, and we're doing any kind of initialization here in this method onCreate that we want. So the onCreate method gets invoked on the activity prior to it being in a created state. So what's the next state? The next state is started where the activity is visible, but the user might not be able to interact with it yet. Before we go to the started state, a method called onStart is invoked. Now, if I move over to our source code, and I look for a method called onStart, we see that it comes up red because there is no method onStart. Now, this is a method that I can choose to implement, or rather override from my superclass, or I can choose to inherit the method and its behavior. Right now, I'm inheriting the method because you see onStart, there is no method locally called onStart. But if I want to override the method onStart, it's very easy. In Android Studio, I simply go within a class but not within a method, and I start typing onStart, and you see that it comes up with a suggestion here, protected void onStart. I double click on this, and now we have an onStart method, and this method will be invoked for us when our activity transitions from created to started. Now, started to resumed is a bit subtle. Resumed means that the user can now interact with our application, and there's nothing that is obscuring this activity. So with started state, there might be a dialog box up that the user has to interact with before getting to our activity. Once that dialog box is dismissed, we go to the resume state, which is the state that our activity is normally in while the user is interacting with it. When we're transitioning from the started to the resume state, a method is called onResume. Now let's go back and take a look and see if we have onResume in our current class. And we see it comes up red indicating that we don't have this method. In other words, we are inheriting it from our superclass. Instead of inheriting it, I can overwrite it if I want to type in onResume. So I type in onResume, and once again, it gives us an overridden implementation of this onResume method. And now I can do anything in the onResume method that I want. Same thing for onPause and onStop. And onPause, what's happening is we're taking an activity that the user can interact with, and we're making it partially visible. Maybe we're putting a dialog box on top of it, so we go to this pause state. We can easily go back to the resume state, and what method is invoked to get back to the resume state? OnResume. Now, we don't actually have to call this method OnResume. We don't have to call the method onPause. There's nothing we have to do here. What happens is under the covers, Android is invoking these methods as we walk up this pyramid and then invoking methods as we go back down. And we know that we have an opportunity, not an obligation, but an opportunity to override those methods and provide some specific behavior. So what kind of behavior might we want to do? Well, we know in onCreate method we are already configuring our location request and our Google API client. That's something we only need to configure one time, and that one time is when our activity is getting initialized. So this is the best place to do it in the onCreate method. Now, what might we do in onStart? Maybe we will initiate a connection to our Google API client. Then in onResume, we might subscribe to location updates. And on pause, we might unsubscribe to location updates. And on stop, we might disconnect from location updates. So subscribing and unsubscribing is an easy thing to do and something that we can do frequently. And indeed, we might want to do it frequently because we see that onResume and onPause is going to get invoked very frequently. Setting up the connection takes a little bit more work, so maybe we only want to do that when our activity goes to the started state from the created state, and maybe we want to disconnect when we go from the paused state to the stopped state. So a lot of things that we need to do here. Let's go ahead and get a few things started. First of all, I'm going to go to the onStart method that I created earlier, and we know here this is where we want to tell our Google API client that we want to connect. Now that looks really innocent, Google API client connect. What's going to happen there? It's going to call this connect method, and the connect method is going to call us back when it has successfully connected. Where's it going to call us back? It's going to call us back in this onConnected method. That's going to go to request location updates. Request location updates is actually going to subscribe us to this location service. So that's what we're going to do in onStart, is we're simply going to make a connection. What about onStop? What about that lifecycle method? You might remember that from our pyramid. So onStop is going from the paused to the stop state. In that case, we have a good opportunity to disconnect. So Google API client.disconnect. There we go. Now we need to handle the onResume and also another method onPause, again from this Android activity lifecycle. Let's start with onResume. In onResume, we want to invoke a method that we've already created. Just a moment as I scroll up and we'll find this method. It's request location updates. Request location updates, if you recall, this is where we're marrying together our Google API client, our location request, and also our location listener. Now we need to handle permissions as well, but we'll hold that thought till a little bit later, so we know we're going to have to come back and refactor this. First of all, let's go to the onResume method. Super is going to invoke this same method in our super class to make sure we're not actually removing any functionality. And now we're simply going to say request location updates. Again, with a note, we're going to need to do a little bit of magic there to deal with permissions. For onPause, we can remove location updates. So this is a method that I'm creating here that has not yet been created. So Alt-Enter will create that method. For remove location updates, I am going to say if Google API client is not null and Google API client.is connected. So let's not try to remove updates unless we know we are connected. So if Google API client is not null and Google API client is connected, then I say location services, and then we'll say fuse location API, remove location updates, and for this we pass in our Google API client and our location listener, which is the current object, in other words, this. As a matter of fact, I kind of like putting this test on to make sure that we actually are connected. Why don't we go to request location updates, and we're going to add that same condition there. And there we go. Now, the trick is we still have to deal with permissions. Let's go ahead and deal with that right now. So in the onConnected method, I'm going to change this to prep request location updates, which is a new method. We'll go ahead and create that method. For the time being, we're going to have prepped request location updates just call request location updates. You see, while I've introduced a new method, the behavior is essentially the same as it was before. I'm calling a new method, which is calling the old method, essentially. More work to happen in this prep request location updates method. I just want to kind of get us set up for success here. So we're invoking that from onConnected. Let's also change the call from the onResume from request location updates to prep request location updates. I did a previous video where we talked about how to do these permissions, so I'm going to hit this in a bit of fast forward because we've already seen it. But we also know it is kind of a little complicated how these location updates happen. So that's why I have to make kind of an intermediate method here, because I need to deal with some permissions. So I'm going to say if, and then we'll say check self-permission, manifest.permission, .access find location, and then we'll say equal package manager .permission granted. So has the user already given us this permission? Or let's say if the user has already given us this permission, then request updates. Okay, we'll take this method call here, and we will bump it up. Else, the user has revoked permission or never gave us permission. So let's request it. So here we're going to say request permission. And well, actually, I'll tell you what, we'll do this in a couple steps. We'll say string, and then an array, and then permission request equals curly manifest.permission.access find location. Once again, I have a video that goes into this in a bit more depth, so I'm hitting it in a little bit fast forward now because this is something we've already been exposed to. Request permission, this is where we're requesting a permission from the user. Request permissions. And we start by passing in the permission request that we made up above. And then we need to give it some kind of unique identifier, some kind of self-addressed stamped envelope. We'll say 1995 here, which is just a unique number, one that I just made up. Now, of course, 1995 is a magic number because it doesn't have any meaning. We just see a number 1995. If I assign it to a constant, then I can give it a more descriptive name. So to assign to a constant, I put my cursor on the number 1995, I hold Control-Alt, and I press C, and we're going to change this from request code to access find location request code. Okay, and there we go. Now a bit of tidy up, and we need the callback method, which is going to get invoked when we hear back from the user. That's a method called onRequestPermissionsResult. And as luck has it, we already have this callback method because we had to ask for camera permission earlier. So notice what happens. We have a request code, which is camera permission request code. Remember that number 1995 from a little bit earlier where I said it's just a unique number? That's that access find location request code we created on line 116. So that's going to be used to determine, are we hearing back from the camera permission or are we hearing back from the GPS permission? So let's add an else part to this if test. Let's make an else if and say else if request code equal and then access find location request code. And then I'll put a note in here, if we are here, we are hearing back from the location permission. Okay, so now what we can do is say if grant results and then 0 equal package manager dot permission granted. That means the user gave us permission. Okay, in that case, we can go ahead and say request location updates, just like so, because we now have this permission. Otherwise, what we might want to do is we might want to say else. We might want to disable the GPS button or just make a toast that says toast.makeText this, comma, and then we'll say GPS unavailable without permission, something like that. Toast.linkLong, and then .show to say show this to the user. And we will go ahead and Alt-Enter, and we will say extract string resource, and we'll say no GPS permission. Okay. We're getting a lot closer now. One more thing I want to do is this onLocationChanged method. If everything works out well, when onLocationChanged is invoked, we should get the new location. So I'm going to say location, and then we'll say .getLongitude, and we'll say location, and then getLatitude. And terminate with a semicolon. Control-Alt-F. We will save these into fields. Remember, a field is a variable that's declared in the class, but not within a method, so it has scope within an entire method. So I set a breakpoint there. One more. Let's go to the Android manifest. And let's indicate that we might be requesting this permission by adding a uses permission at the top, Android name, access find location, and go ahead and terminate that tag and save. Now I've started and deployed the app, and I've set breakpoints in each of the lifecycle methods that we used in this video. On create, on start, on resume, on pause, on stop, on destroy. Let's take a look at the order in which these methods are invoked. So to begin with, no big surprise here, the onCreate method is invoked. and it's going to go through and do any kind of setup activities that are required for our application. Now we're moving down to the part where we are constructing our Google API client, and we call the build method. I mouse over the Google API client, and we see that sure enough it is not null. It has been initialized to some value. So now we go through the location request, and we see that that's getting created. Now I'm going to press F9, but first remember I'm in the onCreate method, so I choose F9. What's the next method to be called? No surprise here, the onStart method is called. Now remember, all we had to do is override these methods. We didn't have to physically call them ourselves. That's because there's something in the Android framework that's doing all the calling for us. This is similar to the template method design pattern that we saw earlier when we saw how to remove the current menu option from a screen. So let me go ahead and choose F8, and then we see we're going to go to connect. I'm going to choose F9. Now you see the onResume method is being invoked. Once again, remember the order. No surprise here. OnCreate, OnStart, OnResume. Let's see what happens in the onResume method. We go to prep request location updates. I'll choose F7. Do we have the permission access find location? No, we don't. So now we're going to request these locations, and I choose F7. Now, in a funny thing that's happened, you see onPause has been called, which feels a bit out of sequence because we just went onCreate, OnStart, OnResume, and onPause. Now, why was onPause called? Well, remember that onPause is called when something is obscuring the activity, something like a pop-up. Let's see if something's obscuring the activity. Sure enough, something is obscuring the activity, and it's our permission request. Let's go ahead and choose Allow. And the sequence of events is going to be a little bit funny now because we're going to try to remove updates, but then we're also coming back and we're trying to request updates at the same time. So this first time around gets a little bit funny. But nonetheless, we're hearing back from the permission request, and we see which permission are we hearing back from? This is the access location permission. Did the user give us permission? The user did give us permission. Let's go ahead and request location updates now. So to request location updates, let's see, are we connected? And is the Google API client null? Well, it looks like both of these are true. We are connected, and the Google API client is not null, so we're okay now to request location updates. So we request updates. Now, because we've heard back from the user and it's about to re-render the screen after getting that user's permission, we're going to go to the onResume state again. So I go ahead and choose F9. No need to re-request updates. And finally, our screen has rendered. Now, pause there for just a moment because I know we had to hop back and forth a little bit between onCreate, OnStart, OnResume, then onPause and OnResume once again as we requested updates from the user. But take a look at what we have now. You see onLocationChanged has been invoked, and notice that we're getting a location object here, and the location object is coming back with a latitude of 39.123 and a longitude of minus 84.23, which incidentally is right about where I am recording this video right now, which is Cincinnati, Ohio. So I choose F8 and choose F8 again, and we should see that the longitude variable has been updated to minus 84 longitude, and the latitude variable has been updated to positive 31. So I choose F9. Looks like we got another location, maybe a couple more that are happening as I had the debugger going. Let me try to simulate a different location. So there's our 84.234. Why don't I bump this? I'll tell you what, we'll move this over closer to the meridian. We'll do maybe minus 14. And then latitude, we'll put it up towards Iceland. We'll say a latitude of positive 66. So what I did to do this is I'm in my emulator, and I simply double-clicked on the little ellipsis at the bottom, which brought up my extended controls, and now I can hit send, which means it's going to send this latitude and longitude to my device. Now we know the device is only looking for an update about every 1 minute with a maximum update time of every 15 seconds, so it might take just a moment, but we should see our breakpoint hit and the location update one more time. And sure enough, the location update has now been hit with our newly updated longitude and latitude that we sent in from the emulator, minus 14 and positive 66. So let's walk through this method one more time. Let's mouse over longitude and we see minus 14. Let's mouse over latitude and we see positive 66. So sure enough, we are getting GPS updates from our application. Our permissions are good and our method calls are good. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to update our latitude and longitude. This will take us just a few more moments. Let's go ahead and do it right now. So I'm going to go to our content GPS plant, and I want to remember what I'm updating here. Take just a moment for this to render. I remove a few distractions and let's see. We have this thing right here, and it is TXT latitude. And then down below that, what do we have? It's a little bit crowded, so let me zoom up. So we know TXT latitude, and then we also have this number over here, which is TXT longitude. So we can use our friend Butterknife to grab access to these two labels. I'll just go to our GPS plant, and let's go up towards the top, and let's say text view TXT longitude, and text view TXT latitude. And then we'll simply use this bind view annotation we see on line number 50. First we'll do an auto import here, and we'll say bind view, and we'll say r.id.txt latitude. There we go. And bind view, and r.id.txt longitude. So we set up Butterknife in a previous video. Essentially, that's able to marry together our layout with a set of attributes or variables that we use to access the different widgets that are on our layout. So now let's go back to our location update on location changed, and I will say txt latitude dot set text, and then set text, and then we'll say latitude. We know that that's a double, so we will say double dot parse, or let's say double dot toString latitude, and that double dot toString method essentially is taking a double as a primitive type and converting it to a string, which we can pass to our setText method. So txt longitude dot setText, and then double dot toString, and then we'll say longitude. So after this, our user interface should update with these values. Let me save, redeploy, and let's see the results. I've removed breakpoints from my screen. You can see right now I have minus 42 and plus 66. Let's go back here and make this minus 15 and plus 65, just a subtle difference, and I'll hit send. It'll take just a moment for this to register, but take a look at the latitude and the longitude that we see up above. And sure enough, after just a moment, you see the latitude is changed to minus 15 and the longitude to positive 65. So this has been a view on how to connect our location listener to GPS services, and how to receive location updates, and also how to update our UI when the location changes. So I hope this video has been helpful. In the next video, we'll see how to start and stop the chronometer, which is this little widget which is showing us our GPS age. I found this to be really useful when I was out GPSing plants, so I could see how stale my GPS data was, and I could maybe wait just a moment to get a new location when I was out GPSing. We can also play a little bit with the pause button and see how to turn on and off GPS updates. I would use this a lot if I was up at a big tree and I looked at the label, but then I needed to walk back several feet or several meters to take a picture of the tree, but I didn't want to lose the GPS location. A lot of the times I would use the pause button for that. So we'll explore that in our next video. Look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.